Okay, I think we can get this started. Welcome. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar and the opportunity to present our thoughts and knowledge on the concept of policy to execution for secure application development. My name is Shane Parfit. I'm Senior Manager of Product Marketing here at Security Compass, and we're coming at you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So first, a bit of housekeeping. For this webinar, we will keep the audio lines muted, but feel free to type any questions into the chat or the Q&A interface there, and we'll try to address them as we go. We'll also open it up at the end of the webinar for questions that you can also type into the Q&A section. So just a reminder, we will send a recording of this webinar to all those attending this webinar by the end of the week. We hope that you'll learn something from this. If you like this webinar or have any questions about the content, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can reply to the reminder emails or just send an email to info@securitycompass.com. Also, if there's any content or webinars that you'd like to see from us, please let us know, and we will consider adding it. So first, for those of you who don't know much about us, small bit about our company. Security Compass is a B2B company focused on application security. So we help companies make their software secure and manage cybersecurity risks without slowing down their business. At the nucleus of our solution is SD Elements, our policy to execution platform for security and compliance. And we can deliver just-in-time application security training for developers through integrations with SD Elements. We also have a large bench of security consultants who perform a variety of advisory services, including pen testing and red teaming. And so on with the webinar content. We have two presenters online today for this webinar. From Security Compass, we have our own Chief Operating Officer, Rohit Sethi. Also on the line, we have Jeffrey Cohen, Director of Software Security from TD Ameritrade. These two gentlemen have known each other for quite some time, and I will let them introduce themselves and talk about their background. And I would like to thank them both for being here. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jeffrey and Rohit to get on with the actual planned content. Rohit, your introduction.
Thanks, Shane. So, as Shane mentioned, my name is Rohit Sethi. I'm the COO at Security Compass. I've been here for 13 years, really focused on helping people build security into the software development process, and looking forward to the conversation today. Jeff?
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Cohen. I'm the Director of Software Security at TD Ameritrade. Prior to that, I was the Global Head of Application Security for JPMorgan Chase. And before that, I led the creation and implementation of Intel's Global Product Security Assurance Program. So I've been involved with application and software security for about 13 years. Prior to that, also have about 20 years of experience in developing software and managing software development teams at various levels.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So we're going to move into talk a little bit about the policy to execution gap, and really, this helps to frame the conversation. A lot of companies have what we call the policy stakeholders, so security and compliance, for example, who do things like define control objectives and control activities that people need to execute on. And then you have the execution teams, which are the software development, software operations, etc., that have to take those control activities and objectives and actually action them. And the gap that exists today is that often the policy stakeholders have defined things at a really high level. For example, you need to make sure you protect cardholder data, which isn't really specific enough for the folks on the execution side. And so the way that people are really addressing this gap in most cases today is with meetings and manual processes, documents, and spreadsheets. So let's dive into this a little bit more, and really to understand what we're talking about. We think about the kinds of things, both from the execution side and the policy side. There's proliferation of technology standards, a proliferation of regulatory and compliance drivers, and just being able to map everything together is increasingly complex. So Jeff, time to hand it over to you. How do you identify with the policy to execution gap in the industry?
Yeah, I think as the last slide that you showed illustrates, large enterprises have so many different types of technologies and different types of applications, and all of that has to get mapped against potentially a very large array of different types of policy requirements, whether they be driven by regulatory requirements or internal or risk type policies. So the scope of this can be quite daunting if you want to try to verify everything, to say this policy is, and all the different instances in which that policy has to be executed. So the problem is if we don't actually do that, we don't really understand all of our risks. And this limits our ability to prioritize our workforce and understand our level of compliance. When that happens, there can also be difficulties in completing audits, and some of our risk assessments end up being ad hoc. I've seen this type of thing occur in many different ways in different companies.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, cool. So let's do a pop quiz. So just try to answer these questions for yourself. First, do your policies prohibit some of the things listed on the right? And if they do, can you provide evidence that your execution and your software and applications and underlying infrastructure, all of that consistently prevent these types of situations? So if someone came in and said, show me all of the instances of these and how you know that they're verified, could you always provide that evidence? And if you can, kudos to you. You probably have super abilities, but in my experience, it's very difficult to have a complete set of execution measurements and evidence to support that execution.
Thanks, Jeff, and I would echo that. I think if anybody could answer yes to all those questions, they should probably win some kind of award. Pretty rare for anyone to be able to do that, especially in a large-sized company. So can you talk about some of the process challenges that arise inside of an organization when they're trying to manage the policy to execution gap?
Yeah, sure. So first, I think, as was alluded to on the last slide, I think the scale and diversity of the different types of execution and measurements to verify that execution that would be required to be able to achieve that is daunting, really. And if you think about how to try to solve that problem, you're in so many, there's so many different domains and so many different types of instances covering so many different types of technologies that it becomes extremely complex and very, very, very quickly. The result is that, if you think about the normal solutions to this, one would be, all right, let's make an investment and try to automate as much as we can up front, so that we know we executed it and we can measure. We have the data at our fingertips to do that. That would be a huge effort, a huge upfront investment in automation. Some of it may not even be The second option would be to invest in the manual effort to review everything and to audit everything and to chase and record every execution instance. This also is essentially impractical, just because of the large scope of this and the resources that would be required. And so, if you can't automate it and you can't do it manually, if those options are both impractical, then how do you get to something that starts to approach a complete solution? I think that's the challenge, the first and foremost challenge. The second challenge I think we have is what I'll call distance between the folks that are primarily concerned with the policy and compliance and the folks who are primarily concerned with the execution of the functions that have some bearing on those policies and the compliance of those policies. Typically, the compliance folks and the execution folks typically are working in different parts of the organization. They typically work on very different timelines with different types of tools and different workflows. They will, they're dealing at different levels of detail and technical specificity. So you may have a very high-level policy statement that the compliance person just wants a yes or no to. But when it comes down to actually the implementation of that, it could be, maybe there's 5 different database systems that all have to, feed up to actually, and be compliant to meet that one requirement. And then each of those could be across hundreds of different applications. And then the other, I think, big difference is a motivational difference. The execution folks are primarily concerned with execution. They're primarily concerned with getting it done and then moving on to the next thing. Writing that software, implementing that user story, implementing that code, committing it, and then moving on to the next item in the backlog. The compliance people, their motivation is much more driven by risk and security and quality and so on. So, with those different mindsets and different perspectives, it creates a distance that is quite tangible if you've been in a situation where you've tried to bridge that gap. The other thing that complicates it is that software, even to other developers, can often be quite opaque. It's complex. It can be difficult to understand and assess unless you've actually, worked in depth with it. So all these challenges, I think, make the problem quite difficult.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff.
Just a couple other comments on it. Okay, so given those challenges, what are some of the common situations that you would see? And frankly, I've seen most of these at one point or another in some instances here and there. I've seen what I've heard called faith-based policies, right? They're aspirational. The compliance folks will sit there and say, how could I not have a policy for this? And yet there's no way to measure that we're able to do it. So it essentially becomes faith-based. Kind of going along with that is the standard gets written, it gets handed to the folks that have to execute it, or they get trained in it, and then the compliance folks sit there and say, well, we told them about it, and now if they get audited and they haven't done it, it's their issue. Also, when you take training, if it's, if it's fairly detailed stuff, it's typical that you don't remember all the details of that a week later or a month later, let alone a year later. So even if you go as far as giving training, it doesn't really solve the problem. What a lot of folks I've seen, seem to happen. What I've seen is okay, verify and measure what's easy and forget the rest. That's something that is kind of a pragmatic solution. The problem is with this type of situation is it leads to what is in some cases kind of a finger in the air type of policy assessment, and that means that risks and gaps of implementation to the policy can go undetected, and the senior executives in the company may very well believe that the policies, they're all, we have the policy, it's 100% implemented, and it's there. And that can lead to a false sense of security, where folks feel that, we have the policy, the senior folks feel we have the policy, but the folks on the ground, some of them understand that, well, we kind of have it, we have it, but we can't prove that, or easily prove that we implement this in all cases.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. So how do you think the policy to execution gap impacts DevOps and Agile development?
I think in some ways it's actually the other way, where the Agile development impacts and DevOps implement the policy to execution gap. And so I'll give you an example, a story here. We had, and I won't say which company this was, but we had a situation where we had a really nice process for doing security reviews on projects, and where we would intercept projects at their formation. When a project number was created, we linked into that process, and folks filled out a very quick, high-level assessment. And then we decided whether we needed to look at it in more detail, and if so, who needed to be involved with that. It's a kind of really good process. But then, as we moved from waterfall to Agile, we started to see the volume of these go way down and almost disappear. And we scratched our head a little bit for a while, and then we realized, well, folks weren't creating projects anymore. They drank the Kool-Aid and started doing Agile, and everything now was user stories and epics and all of that, and it was all in some different tool, and so it was, we had to completely adjust our approach for how we even intercepted and found out about different projects. We also had to answer some different kinds of questions. What parts of the application security or software security requirements should be part of the minimum viable product for an application? What parts should be part of the definition of done? And how do you intercept the backlog formation and program increment planning and so on and so forth processes? These are all important questions. If you're used to big waterfall projects with legacy, monolithic legacy applications, you probably have reviewed design documents and requirements documents. Well, those things almost disappear if you're in an Agile mode where you're building the application from scratch using user stories, and probably a lot of them. In a large company, it's very difficult to keep up with all this, and you have to put a lot of thought into how you intercept and do security reviews. Any secret sauce that you can come up with to make this more practical is really very valuable. The way you do testing, security testing, changes a bit, because now you don't have a big QA cycle. So it's continuous delivery. If you have microservices and single page applications and web services, your SaaS and DaaS that you're running may not be quite as effective with those modern types of software artifacts. And then the way you do training, even, you have to think about that too. If you're used to annual training versus have an approach to do in-the-moment training when something is needed, to have the training available on the spot. Those are some of the challenges that I've seen with Agile and trying to, and if you don't understand what's going on and adapt your programs, your software security programs, you'll either become irrelevant or you'll become a bottleneck. And so it's very important, if you're going through these types of transformations, that you take the time to really study it and understand what's going on, and look for tools like SD Elements that may be able to help you with this. All right.
Excellent. Great insight, Jeff. I think this is something that people really struggle with today. What are some of the current solutions that you've considered to bridge the gap, policy to execution?
Yeah, well, I've tried a lot of them. I've tried the first. I've tried all the ones on this list. Doing using checklists, spreadsheets, and having internal consultants doing security reviews. In one environment, I try to build a tool for attestation. I've tried using Archer. If anyone who has Archer, and if you ever give some of the default requirements that come in there to software developers, they'll probably look at it like it's a different language, and they certainly wouldn't be able to figure out what's relevant to them and be able to use that without some significant work. But where I wanted to kind of zero in for a second is threat modeling. There's a lot of people talk about threat modeling as kind of almost a panacea to solving the front end, the design and requirements type of aspect of security, and it can be very valuable and important in certain contexts. And I certainly made good use of it when I was at Intel, and we were doing a lot of kind of bespoke type of applications. But at companies like the one I'm at now, and when I was at JP Chase as well, our biggest attack surface was our web and mobile applications. And my experience in trying to do threat modeling using a number of different techniques with web and mobile applications typically degraded very quickly into kind of a checklist type of model. Because most of the threats, if you will, on, let's say, a standard web application, mobile application, for example, are things that you could just go down to the OWASP website. You could find these things and what to do about them. And I'm not trying to simplify it. It's quite complicated and quite diverse. But the business logic type of aspects there tend to be dwarfed in terms of risk in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, by the kind of standard threats, the things that are well known, that have typically will have exploits and you know, you know, or have, you know, toolkits and things like that out there for attacking those types of vulnerabilities. People don't know what your business logic looks like. So spending a huge amount of time to, you know, to secure every aspect of your, you know, your application's business logic, and the return on risk that you get for that versus what you get for the standard well-known threats is probably you know, in my opinion, quite small. Most of the mistakes that people make are things that are well-known issues. And that's part of the reason why I tend to lean toward using SD elements for as you know, for almost all my web and mobile applications, and then reserve threat modeling for some very few kind of crown jewels and special case situations.
Awesome. So it's good to hear from somebody who's tried all these things. And so you mentioned SD elements at the end there. Can you share your experience using SD elements, and what were the key learnings from that experience?
Well, so let's start out by looking at the problem that we've talked about and saying, just try to imagine how we would create a tool that could help us solve this problem. So first, you'd want to have a central repository with all your policies in it that was preloaded, you know, with all the relevant policies and associated requirements, and be able to have a set of actionable tasks that that were associated with each standard, and have those organized by role, because each person's going to be able to come in and look and say, what tasks do I care about? If you just give them the high-level policy, they won't know what to do with it. So you'd have to also have it written in a way that makes sense to them, that's in the context of their workflow, their technology, and what they actually do. So you'd want to get experts from each, you know, from infrastructure, from software development, from QA, from architecture, and have them, you know, write these things, and you write these requirements in the form of tasks that could be implemented, and have it come along with things like recipes and training and sample code and other types of job aids to make the job easy. You'd want the content to be configurable so that when you found other things that weren't, you know, that were unique to that application, that you could easily put it in there and adapt it. And then you'd want a mechanism to filter down so that if the application doesn't have a back-end database, then okay, so anything that's reliant on a back-end database, it's not applicable. So don't give it to me. So you'd only want to see the stuff that's relevant to that application, or even to a particular sprint. If you're just doing something very specific, maybe only a very small, maybe there's only one security requirement or no security requirements associated with that. So you'd want to be able to filter it down. You'd want to be able to have open interfaces and out-of-box integration with different types of scanners, so that you wouldn't have to always rely on attestation. If the developer says, yeah, we meet that requirement, cool. But, you know, does your SaaS tool think you've met that in all cases? And to be able to integrate that in there and actually verify wherever it's possible. Can you flip to the next page, please, Roy? Thanks. And, you know, where actual measurements aren't possible, you'd want to be able to have attestation, and you'd want to make that easy. And, you know, so if you put this all in this tool that someone has to go to, when they're in the middle of, doing they're working in their, they're working in their, on their, writing their software, they're in a whole set of other tools, and that they're using for their development. They don't want to have to open up another window and log into another tool. So you've got to be able to fit right into their workflow. And so if they're using a tool, let's say they're using Jira to do their work, so you'd want to be able to have the tasks flow right into Jira and be able to become tasks or user stories or something in Jira, so that when they implement that and they close that story, it automatically feeds back right into this new imaginary tool that we're creating, so that you'd have a real-time view of, and be able of what tasks were completed and how those tasks roll up back to the policies. You'd want this to be flexible in terms of being able to support different types of life cycles, including agile development, and you'd wanted to be able to get all sorts of different types of reports. And if I had to make up a tool and say, what would I want to be able to do to accomplish this? Those are the kind of things I'd want. And and these are exactly the kinds of things you can get with SD Elements. I don't think I mentioned the just-in-time training, but you can get that as well. So you're getting ready to implement a task, which has now become a user story in your Jira, and you need the training. Well, the link for the training for how to do that, how do you write the parameterized query prompt, right? Just click the link and you get that information right there. So I think this, in my view, this really goes a long way to solving the problems of how you can bridge this gap between policy and execution for for web and mobile applications. And in my experience, it's been quite effective.
Awesome. So you want to talk a little bit more on that then, Jeff?
Sure. Yeah. So so when once you sit down with the right set of folks from the application team, or you get the right set of folks together and it could be one person, it could be the architect for that application, or it could be the product owner for that application. They can fill out the initial survey in SD Elements in typically 15 to 20 minutes. And the minute that survey is filled out, it's all point and click. You don't have to type anything. You just click through a bunch of surveys that describe the application's technology stack, and within 15 or 20 minutes, you have a fairly robust set of requirements for that application. There's no need for a security expert to be involved with this process. It can be a self-service process for the application team. And this has been the big challenge with threat modeling, is how do you do that without security experts? Well, this can be done without security experts. It's highly configurable, and it's scalable. I've seen it used on well over 1,000 projects. And the thing that to me is the most powerful about it, though, is it maps and brings those policies into actionable tasks and brings them right into the developer workflow, into their tool chain, and can so never forget the whole train and forget. You can train them, but now it's kind of in their workflow and in their phase. You can create security user stories with this tool that put right into the backlog of the application development team. In one analysis I did, I went to the red team and asked that, looked at what projects they had evaluated and got a list of all their findings, and then looked for which of those applications had been assessed with SD elements. Now, the assessment of SD elements in this case was done after the applications were developed and deployed, because we wanted to kind of go back and see, what we found with it and what it showed. And what we found is that the requirements we got out of SD elements overlap 90% with the issues that the red team had found. So the conclusion of that was that if SD elements had been properly used and implemented during the original development of that application, it could have prevented up to 90% of the red team findings. That was over, the overlap between the two sets of red team applications and SD elements applications. There were 10 applications in common between the two lists that we used to do this study. So I found it very compelling.
That's pretty amazing, Jeff. Appreciate that insight and especially that data that sort of confirms the value. So, I think you've described it at a good level, kind of what SD Elements does. So just to bring this home for everybody, we talked about the policy to execution gap. Really, SD Elements is an expert system that translates policies into actionable tasks and tracks their execution. And, there's really 6 steps to how SD Elements works. And if anybody's interested, we're happy to do a separate deep dive. You contact us and do a separate deep dive to demonstrate the product. But it starts with the questionnaire, as Jeff mentioned, to describe the application, using that to then determine the relevant set of actionable tasks, which have things like code samples and embedded just-in-time training that are then sent into an ALM tool like Jira for developers to action. They start building security in and using the integrated just-in-time training, really start to learn about the security issues they're helping solve. We integrate with security testing tools like scanners. So for example, Fortify, Checkmarks, Veracode, White Hat, etc., to understand what has already been scanned for and then what hasn't been scanned for, to ideally supplement with manual testing. Increasingly integrations into CI/CD pipelines. So for example, having a Jenkins view to understand whether you are real-time compliant with your minimum security standards from a development perspective, and then a wide variety of reports and dashboards to understand how you comply with various security standards and regulatory requirements. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Shane.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey and Rohit. That was really great. I enjoyed hearing your perspective on these concepts for sure. And that brings us to the end of the presentation material. Thank you everyone for patiently listening to our informed views on policy to execution. We welcome your feedback and would like to open up the lines for questions. So there is a Q&A interface at the bottom there and also a chat. So we'll give you guys a chance to type in any questions and I will read them back to Rohit and Jeffrey. So we'll hold for questions. One question coming in. The question is, how do you make something like this stick? So if I can rephrase that maybe for the idea of policy to execution, how do you kind of get buy-in from internal stakeholders to this idea and start acting on solving the issue? So I'll let both you gentlemen weigh in, maybe starting with Jeffrey.
Yeah, sure. So I think the way I have approached this is as follows. First and foremost, you need to have support at the executive level within your company for having secure software. There's plenty of data out there that can be used to show your executives why that's important. Once they accept that, then you know, I been able to and once we start testing and scanning the applications, they usually find that, particularly with older legacy applications, that they're in some cases can be riddled with vulnerabilities. And when they start to see the cost of rework and how much effort there is in refactoring and fixing applications, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that building applications secure from the start is the most effective way to accomplish your goals. And you know, once you've achieved that logical step, then you know, it gets easier to convince folks why this is necessary, and then to build it into your SDLC, whatever that SDLC is. And that's what makes it stick, when it's part of your ongoing process.
Well, gee, I certainly don't have a better answer than that. I would just echo what Jeff said. You know, the thing to keep in mind in many cases is that when you start with a program like this, you're often starting from scratch, in the sense that people haven't already had security requirements and building security in. So you have to do a little bit of selling, right? You have to understand that there's a value prop to this. And so the data that Jeff had talked about, for example, the proof of value of understanding that had you done this stuff earlier on, you know, you would have removed vulnerabilities. You know, very simple exercise is to take a pen test result and then understand how much of, you know, those results could have been captured in SD elements, and really using that to continuously sort of have to sell the idea that building security in is a useful endeavor, and that, you know, static analysis, penetration testing are all complementary activities. They're not replacement activities, but that testing alone, you know, isn't sufficient. And once you get some momentum, like Jeff said, especially when it becomes integrated into the development process, that's what really, you know, makes it sticky.
All right, thanks. Another question here on the chat. With regards to vulnerability remediation, how does Agile affect the remediation timeframe requirement now that everything needs to go into a sprint, and how it may fall outside of the defined remediation timeframe requirement? I think it's kind of a statement of how, you know, these security remediation can slow down you know, the whole process.
Sure. Maybe I'll take a stab at this one and then hand it over to Jeff for any additional thoughts. You know, so Agile is a boon from the perspective of being able to be more nimble in addressing security vulnerabilities. You know, whereas before with Waterfall, if you have a quarterly release cycle and you release a vulnerability, you have to do an out-of-band patch, and that's pretty expensive. With Agile, you have a chance to be more responsive. However, you know, that being said, the things to keep in mind are that if the kind of vulnerability you find is surface level, it's a single line of code, and your static analysis tool picks it up, and you can just change that line of code. And especially if you have automated testing, the cost to fix isn't necessarily that high. But when it's architectural in nature, like the way that the user story has been defined, you know, hasn't taken into account a certain security ramification, the costs are still prohibitive. And oftentimes we'll see people will accept those risks into production because it's just too late and too expensive to fix it. So, you know, even though you can respond more quickly to security vulnerabilities, you know, the idea is to try to minimize the amount of work you do in remediation by addressing security controls up front. And then when you do have remediation, ideally, you know, they're not architectural nature. They're things that maybe slip through the cracks and won't take as long to address. With a product like SD Elements, you'll have the content on, you know, how to address vulnerabilities in the corresponding requirement that's related to it. Jeff, any other thoughts on that?
Actually, I think it was a great answer. The time frames, we actually haven't changed our time frames, what's required between waterfall and agile. And so what that means is that for some of those some of those fixes that are harder to do, they don't necessarily get fixed in the same sprint that they were found. And it's like, the agile train keeps moving, and if you don't make this train, you got to jump on the next train. Now, for something truly critical, you might have to stop the train. But as much as possible, I think we try to keep the kind of similar SLA for remediation that we've had traditionally.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. One more question. How do organizations typically develop their internal security policies with respect to application development? Do they draw from, various standards? Is it all from past experience? What kind of informs that process?
Let me just make sure I heard that correctly. So the question was around how do they develop their security policies for development?
Yes.
Yeah. Jeff, you want to maybe take a first cut, and then I'll add in.
Sure. There. So one of the nice things about I'll mention about SD Elements is it actually comes with quite a nice set of content out of the box, and we've gone through the exercise of mapping this to a variety of different industry standards and so on and so forth, and it typically covers things quite nicely. There may be certain things that you decide that you have to adapt to your own particular environment, like if you have your own way of doing authentication with your own tool sets and things like that. Okay, so you probably want to make that very specific to how you do things. But we've actually found that what comes with SD Elements does a pretty good job of mapping to things like OWASP and other types of either standards or data, industry data on policies.
Yeah, and I think that's very valid. And the only thing I'd add is that usually when we're talking to customers, they will have some high level standards, typically driven from compliance mandates. So, control activities or control objectives that might say something like, make sure you don't hard code passwords or something like that. And so, it's usually we'll find sort of a compliance driven and high level. But as far as sort of a double click into all of the prescriptive guidance you need to do to build secure applications, usually the policy stops short of that, right? So it's a level higher than that, that most companies start with.
Great. Thank you. So there's no more questions on the chat. I guess everyone going once, going twice, last chance to get a question into these two experts in application security. All right. I don't see any more coming in, so I think we can probably end the Q&A session there. So thanks again to you both. It's really great to have experts such as yourselves here to answer these questions directly. Before we close off the webinar, we'd like to let you know that we'll be attending Black Hat USA this year in August in Las Vegas, and we'll be sponsoring the show for the first time with a booth. So if any of you are attending the show, please drop by. We'd love to see you. We're also working on arranging a VIP event for our key customers and those who have a strong interest in working with us. So look out for information about that. from us soon. And if there are no further questions, I think we can end this webinar. Another reminder that we will send out a recording and the slide deck to you all by the end of the week, and we'll follow up on any questions or comments that we receive via email. Again, please don't hesitate to contact us about anything. Also, let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see from us in the way of webinars or other content. You can reply to the webinar invite emails, or you can email us at info@securitycompass.com. Thanks again to everyone for attending this webinar. We hope this has been interesting for you, and we hope you have just a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.